My name is Gary Siliker. I'm currently retired. Well, I am retired. What I brought in today was gunnery books from a course in 1940 in England for what they call DEM ships, defensively equipped merchant ships. And what surprised me about these was this was given to civilian merchant sailors. Even when they brought the military units on board, these guys were still being used as loaders because they understood which shell to get for what purpose. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Described as the longest, largest, and most complex naval battle in history, the Battle of the Atlantic began with the declaration of World War II and ended with the defeat of Nazi Germany. Supplies needed to sustain operations had to be shipped overseas. Crossing the North Atlantic was a dangerous prospect, but with German U-boats lurking in the waters, it became a near-death experience for the civilian sailors of the Canadian Merchant Navy as defensively equipped merchant ships, or DEMS. They travelled in convoys, and while they were always protected, they were never safe. Over 1,600 Canadian merchant sailors died in efforts to maintain supply lines and keep the convoys running, efforts without which a victory would not have been possible.
So what we have here today is a BR Notes of Gunnery Manual and an exercise book. BRs are very common. They're called books of reference, and they're a standardized set of books that were issued to help in the training of merchant sailors and of sailors in the Royal Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy. And so in this BR of gunnery, it outlined how the guns operated, what was needed to maintain the guns, but also just all of the safety precautions and things around the guns. And so it was a quick little pocket manual of just how to operate a gun on a DEM ship. And this exercise book would have been the book he kept all those notes in as he was trained to operate these guns on these merchant ships. So the BRs, originally established by the Royal Navy, were basically a set of rules, customs, traditions, and things that outlined how you wear a uniform, how do you operate a weapon, how do you do formations and drills. So they're wonderful archival reference materials that really speak to that formalized history of military organizations. Gary, what do you know about the Battle of the Atlantic?
Well, what I do know and what I've read is that it was the longest battle of the war from day one to the last day of the war. It was a battle, they said, that could never be lost. It had to be fought regardless of losses. And that the turnaround, there was, in the middle of mid-Atlantic, there was the Black Pit. It had no air coverage. So they had convoys going out, escorts from the Navy on either side. But there was this pit where those escorts couldn't go beyond that because of fuel. And that gap didn't get proper air cover to close it till, I think it was the spring of 43. And once they closed the air gap, there was a turnaround in losses. It was like, oh, we're not losing as many ships now.
So often the reason why targeted ships were left on their own was because the supplies that these convoys were carrying were vital to the war effort and to winning the war in Europe. But it also was vital to the survival of Britain. So coming across the Atlantic, we had food, we had personnel, we had equipment to help fight and win the war. So if that stuff didn't get to Europe, the war might have been lost.
Well, Phil Smeltzer, I only met him once or twice after I moved to Mahone Bay. He had served as a reserve soldier in the West Nova Scotia Regiment, or Lunenburg Regiment, whatever it was that time before the war. And when the war came, he joined the Merchant Navy, and such as it was. And he did that. He across the Atlantic, and he also served in the Mediterranean, in North Africa, running supplies into North Africa in 42. After that, he came back, and being a civilian, he opted not to go back to sea, and he joined the Army in the Canadian Provo Corps. And he spent the rest of the war as a small arms instructor in Canada, training soldiers going overseas.
Wow, what a life.
Oh, yeah.
What's really neat about his exercise book is I noticed he has a series of drawings in it. It's something they don't teach anymore, is it? That the drawings and the technical, the math and the notes in the books, it's all digital nowadays.
Yeah, and most kids don't have to worry about getting the old compass there with a pin at one end and a little lead pencil at the other end drawing around. That's gone by the wayside, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Gary, do you know why it was so dangerous to serve as a merchant mariner?
They were going out, and their ship was the main target. I mean, they put the tankers in the middle and the freezer ships in the middle, but they were always targets, and that the U-boats wanted into. And over the years, I keep checking this stat out, but it keeps coming back that learned people have done these studies that the most hazardous place to be served during World War II was to be a merchant sailor on the North Atlantic convoys. I remember the stats saying your chances of dying was 1 in 9. The next most dangerous occupation would be people who flew in bomber command. You know, if your ship went down, as you mentioned earlier, you'll get left behind. And even cases of all the crews getting off, you know, they just perished from exposure later on. And that's, to my mind, why it was so dangerous. If you didn't go down, you're liable to perish on the water or in a boat because nobody's picking you up.
Absolutely. I think people underestimate the dangers that do exist on the open ocean, especially in the North Atlantic. It was cold, it was rocky, it was unforgiving. And so if you landed yourself in the water after your ship went down, the chances of survival were slim. And if you did get picked up, chances of you surviving to make it to a POW camp, again, was precarious at best. And so it really was a true sacrifice on the part of these Canadians who served on merchant marine ships. They really were doing a job that was truly thankless but absolutely necessary during the war. The tricky part about tracking down merchant marine history is that they were civilian sailors. So the records of these merchant mariners were either held by the company they were employed under, or they just didn't exist or weren't kept. Gary, what do you plan on doing with these artifacts?
Well, I'm not taking them back to my home bay to gather dust in a cupboard anymore. So I talked to the folks down the Leeds the other night, and they said, if you can find them a good home, send them off to a good home. So would you have a good home you could send these to?
Absolutely. We would be honored to have them at the Naval Museum of Halifax.
Perfect. Good place for them to go to.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Well, Gary, I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it was to meet you and to see these beautiful artifacts that you brought in today. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here. I'm pleased they're going to a good home because the third drawer in the cupboard in the Legion, in the kitchen, in my home bay, doesn't do them justice. So it's nice to know that they're going to be used, probably seen, but they can be used. People can refer to them.